The harmful algal bloom is a yearly occurrence in Northwest Ohio, and it can impact our water, which affects the water you drink, as well as tourism and recreation in Northwest Ohio, especially along the lakeshore. So as we gear up for algae season, what can you expect this year? And how are the weather conditions, in particular heavy rainfall, playing a role in our harmful algal blooms? I'm going to answer that question in this week's edition of the Climate Friday newsletter. And you can also stay tuned each and every Thursday throughout the summer. We're going to have updated information from the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Association and share that information with you pertinent to the harmful algal bloom. So let's break down the data and what we know right now about the algae and what you can anticipate as we go forward into the remainder of the summertime season. So let's talk in particular about the weather variables that impact the algae bloom, especially heavy rainfall. That is something that was cause for concern earlier this season, especially during the historically rainy month of April that was the rainiest on record. Heavy rainfall increases runoff. Essentially, all of that moisture in that water gathers nutrients from farm fields in Northwest Ohio. They drain into the Maumee River, and the Maumee River thus carries them into Lake Erie. We call that nutrient loading. Phosphorus is one in particular that when it gets into the lake, that can cause some problems that can feed the growth of harmful algae in our lake waters. So rainfall, that is the first step in the ingredient to this. Fertilizer and also manure from farm fields that can be drained from that rainfall into our rivers and lakes, in particular the Maumee River, which thus drains into Lake Erie. And when the summer heat ramps up, it can enable that blue-green algae to proliferate and spread and cause a bad algal bloom. The vast majority of these nutrients, including phosphorus, come from agriculture, and data shows that 85% of phosphorus is from farm fields in Northwest Ohio. And believe it or not, some fields back in northern Indiana, the Maumee stretches all the way to Fort Wayne. Some of those fields can actually leach some of those nutrients into our bodies of water as well. So right now, we did have a rainy April for sure, but the impact of the severity this year, it's going to largely depend on our June rainfall and how summer begins in the coming weeks. If we see more rain in the early part of June, that is favorable for a larger and more severe bloom. If it's a bit of a drier start to the month of June, that would equate to a smaller and less severe bloom. Now, the month of April was historic in the rainfall department, and significant amounts of phosphorus were released into the rivers and lakes. In fact, the month of April had the second highest recording of phosphorus levels since 2003. So in the last 2 decades, it ranked number 2 for the phosphorus that was leached into the Maumee River. That being said, because of the dry weather we've had lately, we've seen those levels sort of level out a bit, and that is good news in that we're not seeing that meteoric rise in phosphorus that can be common. So bioavailable phosphorus, this is a big metric, and it can be used to compare various years throughout history and use that data to extrapolate what we can expect for the algal bloom this year. Now, this is measured in metric tons, and our current reading, at least as of May 21st, is 263. That is somewhere in the middle of the road as far as bioavailable phosphorus levels go. If we were to see sky-high numbers like 2015, if you look over on the side of that bar, over 700. If we saw a number like that, that would be incredibly alarming regarding a significant algal bloom outbreak. Also, some very high numbers in 2011, you may remember that one, and a decade ago in 2014. We are more in the ballpark of what we've seen over the last few years, which is to say moderate to slightly larger than average. On the lower end of the spectrum, you get years like 2012, and if you follow that one over to the y-axis, only a little over 100. So 263, certainly very modest compared to the values that we've seen in the past. So what do experts anticipate for this year's harmful algal bloom? Moderate to larger than moderate. What that means is there is still a bit of a range and there is still some degree of uncertainty. We measure the severity of the index on a scale of 1 to 10, and this is the range that we expect this year, which does convey some uncertainty. A 10 would be the worst imaginable algal bloom, and a 1 is a less severe harmful algal bloom. So we fall somewhere in the middle of the road, although if we do see warmer and wetter weather, that could lead to a worse than normal harmful algal bloom. Here's how this year's forecast or outlook compares to past years. We're likely going to be somewhere in that ballpark of 2022 to 2023. You'll notice 2019 and also 2017, those were both significant in the ballpark of 7 to 8, and our range this year could be anywhere from a little bit less than past years to a little bit above past years. That 4.5 to 7.5 range, that initial forecast from NOAA, or the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Association, still on track based on the latest data. We're still very early on in the season. August and September, that is when we see the peak algal bloom, and that coincides with the warmest waters of the Western Basin. Due to those shallow Western Basin waters, we do see an increase in temperatures in the summertime, and then once conditions start to cool in October, that marks the end of the algae season. In addition to the rainfall, warm temperatures increase the spread and proliferation of algae, and due to the shallow waters on our side of Lake Erie, that contributes to warmth and also growth and expansion of the algae. Now, we're still very early on. As summer ramps up and as we get more data on what you can expect for this year's harmful algal bloom, we'll share that with you both on the Climate Friday newsletter and also on air at 5:30 p.m. each and every Thursday.